The sterile scent of antiseptic couldn't mask the stench of injustice. Minutes ago, Dr. Eleanor Harding, a woman who had dedicated her life to healing, had reduced her to a statistic, a problem, a burden. Now, as tears welled, a single question echoed in Amina's mind. What if the person who was supposed to bring her joy was also responsible for tearing down her dignity? Little did Eleanor know, within 15 minutes, the hospital corridors would tremble, not with the sound of a scalpel, but with the unwavering presence of a man fueled by love and fury. The fluorescent lights of the examination room hummed, a dull, insistent thrumming that seemed to amplify the tremor in Amina's hands. She clutched the thin white paper of the hospital gown tighter, the cool fabric doing little to soothe the sudden chill that had settled over her. Her heart, usually a steady and reliable drum, was now hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a frantic staccato mirroring the anxiety that had coiled in her stomach. It had started the moment she walked into the sterile space, a space that should have held nothing but hope and the promise of life. Instead, it felt like a cold, unforgiving echo chamber, reflecting back anxieties she hadn't even known she possessed. This was supposed to be a day of celebration, a chance to catch that first, tangible glimpse of the miracle growing inside her. This was supposed to be the day she saw her baby. Amina stared into the eyes of Dr. Eleanor Harding, whose gaze, usually the comforting source of medical expertise, was now something a bit more menacing. Dr. Harding, as her name tag read, was a woman of impeccable professionalism, her perfectly coiffed dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, her crisp white coat immaculate. Her eyes, though, were the giveaway, the cold, hard gleam that reflected back the artificial light, mirroring the unyielding steel of the instruments laid out on the nearby tray. It had always been her eyes. They had seen so much with judgment. Those eyes were judging Amina right now. Amina's skin, normally warm and flushed with the flush of pregnancy, felt suddenly cold and clammy under the doctor's scrutiny. This was the first time she would be able to confirm the pregnancy along with her and her family. The appointment, she realized, had been foreshadowed by a subtle undercurrent of unease ever since arriving at the hospital. First from the receptionist, a woman whose smile had faltered as Amina had given her name. Then, the waiting room, which, while filled with expectant mothers, also held an unspoken vibe of judgment. But she had brushed it aside, chalking it up to nerves. She had been so focused on the wonder of the ultrasound, the joy of seeing her baby, that she had dismissed the subtle signals. "All right, let's get started, shall we, Mrs. Williams?" Dr. Harding's voice was smooth and controlled, devoid of any warmth. It was the professional mask, Amina knew, the carefully constructed persona of a medical professional. Yet behind the veneer of competence, Amina sensed a subtle undercurrent of something else, a detachment, a coolness that felt personal. Amina nodded, trying to force a smile. "Yes, doctor." Dr. Harding's gaze lingered on Amina's chart for what felt like an eternity, her expression unreadable. After what seemed like a lifetime of observation, Dr. Harding began with the preliminary tests. Amina attempted to relax, but the sterile setting and the doctor's reserved demeanor made it difficult. It felt as though the doctor's assessment held a preconceived notion about how this appointment would go before it actually started. Dr. Harding moved with precision, her actions efficient and economical, but the focus was lacking, leaving Amina feeling more like a specimen on a table rather than an expectant mother about to see their baby. The gel, cold and viscous, smeared across Amina's belly, sending a jolt of surprise through her system. It was the first thing Amina truly felt, but this would quickly diminish. She was starting to feel that the warmth of the appointment was also being smothered. Dr. Harding glided the ultrasound wand across her abdomen, the screen flickering to life. Amina leaned forward, her breath catching in her throat. Finally, the moment she'd been waiting for, the moment she would begin a new life. It should be so much fun for so many reasons. But then Dr. Harding spoke, and the joy was swept away. "Your medical history indicates a higher risk." The pronouncements were delivered with the same precision, the same coolness, as the doctor's physical examination. Dr. Harding barely made it through the standard assessment before voicing her concerns. Amina's breath hitched. She was expecting the joy of seeing her baby, yet instead she was met with a judgment. Amina felt the blood drain from her face. "Higher risk?" she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. Dr. Harding, without looking up from the screen, continued, "These complications are frequently seen, particularly in women with—" She paused, her eyes finally rising to meet Amina's, and Amina knew this was the part that would haunt her, the underlying tone Amina felt so strongly. Amina felt a coldness run up her skin. She stopped short. Amina knew what was coming. Certain predispositions, the unspoken words, the unspoken judgment, hung heavy in the silence. Before she was able to collect herself, the doctor resumed speaking. Amina had been prepared. Amina knew all of the implications, but she did not expect the dismissiveness of Dr. Harding's stare. It was more akin to a threat. The predispositions were subtle, a code that Amina knew better than most: race, socioeconomic status, and a long string of assumptions about choices she'd made in her life. Assumptions that bore no relevance to her medical condition. Amina tried to counter these claims, to explain her family's history, to clarify she was a healthy individual, but the doctor cut her off with a dismissive wave of her hand. It reminded Amina of when she was a kid, when a teacher was lecturing to all the kids about a serious topic. Yet when she tried to point out a mistake she was making, the teacher just waved her hand. "We'll need to monitor this closely, Mrs. Williams," Dr. Harding said, her voice devoid of any empathy. "We'll need to start running some additional tests. Some are more serious than others." Her words hung in the air, heavy with implications Amina didn't require a medical degree to decipher. These testing would be more important, and she already knew what she was referring to. Amina was already having a hard time accepting the fact that her doctor did not seem to care about her. Amina, a woman known for her calm and rational approach to life, found a surge of anxiety rising up within her. It was as if the sky darkened significantly. Her voice wavered as she asked, "What kind of risks, doctor?" Dr. Harding, without meeting her eyes, rattled off a series of medical terms, a flurry of technical jargon designed to confuse and intimidate so that Amina would barely have a chance. She felt that the doctor was using this to further her point. It was far too many medical jargons Amina was not able to understand. The doctor was using technical terms to justify her point, and in that moment, Amina knew that the game was already rigged, as if this was a show. Amina struggled to understand, to grasp the meaning behind the words, but the doctor, seemingly impatient, cut her off with a curt, "It is too early to make any definitive conclusions, Mrs. Williams. We'll need to run a series of tests to determine the severity of the situation. For now, we'll monitor it. No specific concerns. No need to worry." The words were meant to be reassuring, but they landed like stones. The doctor's expression remained as cold as the examination room, the sterile setting. She was not just her doctor, she was her executioner. Amina felt a growing sensation that the appointment was now going to be about survival. More and more, she had no power. Amina was feeling the weight of the hospital's reputation. "Monitor it?" Amina asked, her voice trembling. But what does that mean for the baby?" Dr. Harding sighed, a sound of exaggerated patience. "We'll need to schedule more frequent appointments, additional scans. It could mean delivering early. There are many factors." She paused, finally meeting Amina's gaze, and Amina could see the almost imperceptible tightening of her jaw. "It means we need to take extra precautions, given your—" She trailed off, again leaving the unspoken implications hanging. Amina's carefully constructed composure began to crumble. The joy she had been anticipating, the excitement of seeing her child, was replaced by a cold knot of fear that tightened with every passing second. It was as if her body was rejecting her baby before she even gave birth. The doctor was using euphemisms to justify her point, as though Amina did not understand. She was giving Amina a speech that was full of judgments and accusations. She clearly disliked her. How dare she? She came here to get a glimpse of her child, and now she had a battle. Not just an internal battle, as her body was already doing, but now she had external adversaries. Amina tried again. What specific precautions? Her voice was barely a whisper. She felt suddenly small, insignificant, and terribly alone. They were just going to let her hang here like a criminal in front of a crowd. Dr. Harding shook her head, her expression a mask of clinical detachment. We will discuss the details after the tests. For now, understand that your case requires enhanced monitoring. This is not the time for speculation. You must not worry. The finality of her words was crushing. Amina could already feel the weight of the tests to come, the invasive procedures, the endless stream of appointments. She felt the weight of the unspoken judgments, the subtle accusations, the unspoken fear that had begun to manifest. The test results were the keys to her doom. The doctor's attitude was not a one-time occurrence. It was a pattern, the coldness, the dismissiveness. It was subtly woven into countless interactions throughout Amina's life. The way she was treated, the way she was categorized. Amina knew it too well. It was the way her ancestors were treated. It was the way she was being treated now. It was a system. Amina felt the color drain from her face. She forced herself to sit up, to try to collect herself. But the room began to spin. The image of her baby, usually so clear on the screen, had begun to fade. She realized that her medical history was more than just a collection of facts. She had been reduced to a checklist of perceived vulnerabilities, a set of statistics that seemed to define every aspect of her being. The sting of Dr. Harding's cold gaze, the way her words seemed to drip with judgment, more a reflection of her own biases than of Amina's health, echoed in the emptiness of the silence. It was a quiet echo that amplified the fears she hadn't realized she carried until this very moment. Amina, once so full of hope and anticipation, found a sense of dread settling in and casting a shadow over any thoughts of joy. Amina felt the weight of what the doctor was saying, almost as if she was a burden. She turned again to Dr. Harding and asked desperately, "What do you mean by monitoring?" The doctor looked at her, a quick flicker of eye contact. Amina felt fear. What will she do? Dr. Harding simply responded, "Amina, you are not the only one in this position. It is not a pleasant situation, and yet we must stay professional." This comment was what broke Amina. The professionalism, the lack of sympathy, the coldness. Dr. Harding was like the person who gave Amina an eviction notice. It made Amina feel like she did not matter. And at that moment, looking for the first time at her baby's results, she came to a decision. Amina wasn't going to let Dr. Harding treat her as if she did not matter, even if it was going to be a challenge. Amina took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. It's her body, she thought. It's my baby. I know better than you, doctor. She stood, the paper rustling, the gel sticking to her skin. Amina realized that she will have to protect her baby from what she was experiencing. Amina spoke. Her voice surprisingly was calm, but firm. "Thank you, doctor. I think I've heard enough for today. I'd like to reschedule." Dr. Harding's eyebrows rose slightly, signaling the surprise she clearly felt. It was obviously not a part of the plan. No one, apparently, had spoken to her this way. "Are you sure, Mrs. Williams?" Amina nodded, her face unreadable. As she stared at the doctor, as she prepared to leave, she felt like she was just rescued. A sense of calm began to spread. "Yes, I am." Amina turned and left the examination room. The sharp sting of the fluorescent lights in the hallway felt like salt in a fresh wound. Amina stumbled out of Dr. Harding's office, the sterile air suddenly thick with the unspoken weight of what had just transpired. It felt as though she was gasping for air, choked by the dismissive tone, by the unspoken judgment that clung to her like a second skin. Humiliation had been a bitter, unwelcome guest in her life before. Now it was a constant companion. The echoes of Dr. Harding's cold and cutting words continued to replay in her mind, a relentless loop of condescension and subtly veiled accusations. Each sentence, each carefully chosen phrase, was a fresh blow, chipping away at her composure. The way the doctor had minimized her concerns, dismissed her questions as irrational, and acted as though her very presence was an inconvenience. It was more than just a medical appointment gone wrong. It was a deeply personal assault, a wound delivered with the precision of a scalpel and the detachment of a stone. As Amina made her way down the hallway, each step felt heavier than the last. She bumped into a passing nurse, mumbled a quick apology, and then continued moving on. The sterile white walls, once a symbol of life and healing, now seemed to press in on her, amplifying the sense of isolation. The joy she had felt just moments before, the thrill of expectant motherhood, had been brutally extinguished, replaced by a cold, gnawing fear. What should be a beautiful moment in her life made Amina feel as though she was in the darkest of times. The joy that Amina held for her child felt as if her baby went blind, all because of her skin. Reaching the relative safety of the elevator, Amina pressed the button with a trembling hand. The doors slid open with a hiss, and she stepped inside, finding herself alone in the small metal box. As the elevator descended, her composure, which was still holding, finally began to fracture. Tears, hot and stinging, welled up in her eyes, blurring her vision. It was all too much, the weight of the doctor's words, the feeling of being diminished, and the fear for her unborn child. When the elevator doors opened, she could barely see. As she made her way to the parking garage, the tears streamed unchecked down her face, leaving damp tracks on her cheeks. She fumbled with her keys, her fingers clumsy with emotion. It was then, as she sat behind the wheel of her car, finally alone and shielded from the stares of the world, that the dam finally broke. The flood of emotions that had been building throughout the appointment finally overwhelmed her, leaving her shaking with sobs. She swiped down her arm, as though trying to erase the experience. Amina, a woman of strong character, found herself in a moment of weakness. It was at that moment that she realized she couldn't bear this on her own. She tried to steady her breath, gathering what little strength she had. She wanted reassurance, not for herself, but her baby, for her sanity. Amina knew she needed someone who could listen without judgment, someone who could offer comfort and support. And more than anything, she needed help. She did the only thing she could. She reached for her phone, the weight of it suddenly feeling immense. She found her speed dial. Her husband, David. As she dialed the number, her hand trembled. David wasn't just her loving partner, the man who held her hand through every joy and hardship. David was also the chairman of the hospital board. Beyond the love, the shared dreams, and the comfort of their home, David was the man who understood the system, the very system the doctor worked within. The walls, the infrastructure, the policies. David was, in many ways, a silent architect and an insider who could help expose the issue. When her phone rang through, she tried to compose herself. She didn't allow her to sound as though she was already defeated. A smile. She didn't. She took a deep breath. The call connected, and David's voice, calm and steady, filled the car, filling her with a sense of comfort. "Hey, honey, what's up?" The sound of his voice, familiar and reassuring, was enough to make the tears flow again. She held herself in it. "David," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I just had my appointment with Dr. Harding, and it was—" She could barely get the words out. She was struggling. She was at a disadvantage. But David never gave up. He gave her the strength to keep on going. "Hey!" "Shh, it's okay. Take your time. What's wrong?" he said gently, his voice instantly concerned. He could hear it. He could hear Amina's emotions. Amina tried to hold back the flood of emotions, but the story tumbled out in fragments. She started there. The patronizing tone, the dismissive attitude, the way she had belittled her. It was clear, though, The tears weren't going to allow her to tell her story. Amina was sobbing so hard, so deep, that she needed space to breathe. She didn't listen, Amina choked out. She talked down to me, like I wasn't worth listening to. She made me sound like I was doing all these things wrong. Her voice broke, and a fresh wave of tears washed over her. David listened in silence, his usual calm demeanor giving way to a simmering fury. He didn't interrupt. He let her speak. He listened patiently, letting Amina vent. Amina could hear his concern, his love. It was her saving grace. Amina began to feel safe to tell him the true extent of her experience. She was going to let it all out, the good and the very bad. She knew that he would hear what she had to say. She knew that she could trust him. Amina continued. She told him about the way Dr. Harding had examined her chart, her initial assessment that went nowhere, about the unspoken assumptions and the cutting remarks she had to endure. She spoke about the fear, the very present fear she experienced. She knew he would know what was at stake. She described the doctor's detachment, the coldness that felt personal, of how the doctor was not looking at her or her health. She spoke of the way her history and skin had been weaponized. Amina felt like she was in a war. The doctor reminded her of a villain. She wanted to see the villain defeated, to get rid of the situation that her baby was now in the middle of. She told David about the way she felt diminished and isolated, the way she had felt like a stranger in a place that was supposed to provide support and care, where there was no caring at all. As the story tumbled out, David's silence became increasingly palpable. She could sense the shift in his mood, the steady build-up of pressure. His usual calm and measured demeanor was slowly giving way to a simmering, controlled fury. Amina knew it was a storm brewing, and yet she felt so relieved. The storm in her life was becoming something more, and she could see the destruction it was creating from the very start. Amina always knew she had a friend, her biggest ally in David, and yet he had his own responsibilities, the hospital and its staff. When Amina was finished, her voice raw and exhausted from the emotional outpouring, there was a long silence. The only sound was the faint hum of the car's engine and the soft sound of her own ragged breaths. Amina felt like she collapsed. She needed to rest. David just knew. Finally, David spoke, his voice a low rumble that vibrated with a restrained emotion that was even more present than it had been before. It was a mix of love, concern, and something else, a quiet, deadly rage that Amina had rarely seen. David was almost like a volcano that had been building for years. "I'm on my way, Amina." The words were simple, but they carried a weight of certainty. They spoke of action, of protection, of unwavering support. They let Amina know that she was not alone, that she was not going to endure her ordeal alone. David was her savior. She knew that something would change. She had spoken, and she knew that their situation was going to be different. "David, please," Amina whispered, her voice trembling. I don't know what to do." "Don't worry, honey," he said, his voice still a low rumble. "I'll handle it. Just stay put. Take care of yourself. I'll be there." The call ended, and the line went silent. Amina leaned back in her seat, exhausted. In that moment she felt a flicker of something beyond the fear and humiliation, a glimmer of hope. With David on her side, she knew that the fight, the confrontation with the doctor, with the system, was not going to be one-sided. It was a two-way street, and now she had a strong ally. Now she had hope, and she had the man she loved. Amina closed her eyes, letting the warmth of David's love envelop her. The tears had subsided, replaced by a weary determination. She reached up to touch her belly and softly caressed the place where her baby was growing. The baby, she thought. They would go through this together. She took a deep breath, focusing on the reassurance of David's call. He was going to do something. She might not know what would happen, but she knew that she was not alone. With that thought, She resolved to stay calm, to try and make it through. She had to. And in that moment, the darkness that had settled over her began to recede slightly. Amina knew that whatever she had to endure to protect her baby, she would do it without hesitation. The chrome and glass of the hospital, once a symbol of David's own professional success and influence, now felt like a stark, unforgiving landscape. As he strode through the bustling corridors, the sterile scent of antiseptic, usually a comforting aroma of cleanliness and healing, now carried a faint undertone of the wrong that had been done to his wife. His jaw clenched, a muscle working beneath his well-groomed beard. The phone was still in his hand, ready to call whatever number he needed to call to show his resolve to Dr. Harding. He could feel the weight of his position, the chairman of the hospital board, a man respected for his meticulousness and unwavering resolve. It was not a role he took lightly, but today, his professional responsibility was second to the fury that had erupted from Amina's devastating phone call. One glance between David and Amina's eyes, a nod and reassurance, they knew what had to be done. He bypassed the reception desk, ignoring the startled gazes of the few nurses and staff he encountered. He was a man on a mission. He knew which path to go down. His strides had increased into a near run. His destination, Dr. Eleanor Harding's office. He needed to get this thing done with. Reaching her door, he didn't bother with a courtesy knock. He entered, his presence filling the room with an immediate shift in atmosphere. The air, already thin, seemed to crackle with the unseen power he exuded. Dr. Harding, startled by the sudden intrusion, looked up from her paperwork. Her perfectly composed features momentarily betrayed a flicker of surprise before she quickly assumed her practiced professional mask. She looked up through her glasses and spoke as she always did. "Mr. Williams," she began, her voice as precise and controlled as ever, "what can I do for you?" David planted himself directly in front of the enormous, pristine desk. He did not sit. He would not waste time. He would not concede any authority. His stance was firm, his gaze unrelenting. "I am here to discuss the treatment of my wife, Amina Williams," he said, his voice a low, even rumble. The control he managed was a mark of his discipline. Dr. Harding's composure wavered. The precision she had carefully crafted now faltered. It became clear that she was at least realizing just how serious their position had become. The realization washed across her face as David did not hold back to his concerns. "I am aware of her medical status," Dr. Harding responded stiffly. It made it all too clear that she had already reviewed everything about Amina. David chose his words carefully, each one a deliberate strike. "I'm here to discuss the manner in which she was treated, Doctor." He stressed the word as if it was a knife. The alleged treatment. David remained composed, but the undercurrent of controlled fury was impossible to ignore. The coldness, the assessment with the lack of care, the lack of empathy, it was all of it. He was going to make sure he was hearing about this. She was going to understand the magnitude of how she had behaved. Dr. Harding frowned slightly, her hand instinctively rising to adjust her glasses. She sensed an ambush. She wasn't sure which way it was going to go. She was sure, though, that things were about to go downhill. "I assure you, Mr. Williams, I always strive to provide the best possible care for my patients." "Indeed," David's voice was a cool blade. "Because according to my wife, the care today felt less than optimal. Actually, the care felt like a personal attack." Dr. Harding bristled slightly, her eyes narrowed. She was a woman accustomed to respect, not challenge. "I am not sure I understand your concern, Mr. Williams," she stated, as though David was being difficult. She was an expert who was often considered to be extremely professional. Her words, though, sounded hollow inside. "I'll explain." David did not falter. He had no intention of making this easy. "My wife came here today carrying our child. She came excitedly to get her first glimpse of the child. She met with disdain, condescension, and thinly veiled accusations. Accusations that were rooted in assumptions based on assumptions about her race and how she was raised. the opposite of what she had come for. He took a step forward, his presence filling the room. He looked Dr. Harding straight in the eye, as if staring in a mirror. She was made to feel small, doctor, humiliated, frightened. That is not care, that is malpractice. Dr. Harding had always taken pride in her work. She had built her reputation on hard work and precision, and now a small part of her was crumbling. The doctor, for the first time, seemed to falter. Her face reddened slightly, and for a split second there was a flash of defensiveness in her eyes. "Mr. Williams, I am a physician of 20 years. I only endeavor to provide the best medical assessments in the field. There is no need to be confrontational, sir." "There is every need," David replied. "When a patient is treated with a blatant disregard for their dignity, when their concerns are dismissed, when their medical history is used to justify preconceived notions, then there is every need. My wife deserves better, not only as a patient, but as a human being," he continued. "Let me remind you of who I am." He pointed at the wall, as if the framed diplomas were of primary importance. "And yes, I would want you to provide the best medical treatments. But at what cost? You're supposed to be a doctor. I am not a fan when doctors choose to be condescending or full of assumptions. Your goal is to heal and provide guidance, is it not?" He spoke to the doctor, hoping to get a point across. He wanted to know why she acted the way that she did. In that moment, the carefully constructed facade of Dr. Harding began to crack. The clinical detachment she had cultivated so carefully was crumbling. She stared at David. Her eyes darted around. The look on her face was one of dawning fear. The words, if there were going to be any, was as if someone was going to put them in a hole. The pressure was starting to build. He'd heard the words. He knew. The coldness was now being used against her. The words he was using, almost, were a weapon. "Mr. Williams, I assure you that my intentions are always to do what is best for the patient." Dr. Harding stammered slightly, realizing that all of that was going to be used in the context of her defense. It was her. It was her fault. Her fault. "Best for the patient." David's voice dripped with sarcasm. "Or best for your statistical analysis, best for upholding your preconceived notions about someone who might not be worthy of your care." He circled the room slowly. He knew that he was an intimidating presence. He began again. "This isn't just about my wife, doctor. It's about a pattern. It is about a system inside this hospital that allows this type of behavior. It's about a larger issue. An issue, it would appear, that is starting with you. I want to understand why. Right. Now." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to sink in. The air in the office crackled with tension, a palpable energy created by the collision of two wills, two worldviews, in a confined space. Dr. Harding's carefully controlled facade had begun to shatter. The professional mask was crumbling. Now it was clear. She was faltering. Her face, usually so composed, betrayed her feelings. A mixture of defensiveness, disbelief, and a growing sense of desperation. It was a moment of reckoning. She was realizing her actions had consequences. This was where she was going to get the price of her actions. The doctor's attempts to defend herself devolved into a tangled web of medical jargon and deflection. She spoke of protocols, of risk assessments, of her years of experience. But David wasn't interested. He was interested in the behavior, the pattern, and the blatant disrespect and why all of that was. "Doctor," David said, cutting through her feeble attempts at defense, "I'm not interested in the standard excuses. Amina is not the first. We're going to find out. In fact, I've already started the investigation." He paused. Silence filled the air again. "I want to know why. Why my wife had to endure this. This has to go further. I have zero tolerance for it, and you will regret your actions." The silence stretched, punctuated only by the gentle hum of the fluorescent lights. The tension was almost unbearable. The doctor had been cornered. "Finally," Dr. Harding answered, her voice a shaky whisper, I don't know what to say, Mr. Williams. It was a misjudgment on my part. A massive understatement. She was now trying to come out alive. A misjudgment. He repeated the word, his voice flat. You call it a misjudgment. This was far more than that, Doctor. It was a betrayal. You betrayed her. You betrayed your Hippocratic oath. David knew he had her. He knew that she was not going to be able to continue. The doctor was on her way out. You have violated your oaths. You did what you were not supposed to do. You were inhumane. You caused tremendous trauma and humiliation to my wife, to my baby. David, through his own power and influence, had the power to change the situation in a matter of minutes. He was going to make sure she would pay for it. He pressed forward. What action have you taken since you spoke with her that makes you look like you deserve redemption? You had one chance to apologize, one chance. David did not falter. He needed to provide an example. It was his job. He was going to do this. He wanted to make sure that this never happened again. Dr. Harding struggled to get out of that hole. She was a well-known personality. I spoke to the committee, Mr. Williams. I will take courses, education. I was going to apologize. David glared. She was making this harder than it needed to be. Doctor, I don't need you to do anything. The issue is not if. The issue is why. Why did you come to the conclusion that you did? David stood. The final words said by David were what she had feared the most. It was the final straw. The game was now over. The office felt suffocating. The battle lines had been drawn, and the two very different worlds had now fully collided. The walls, the structure, everything in the room, all of it, was now silent. I will start an immediate review of the protocols used by you. You cannot treat people the way you did. Your medical career goes into question, and that's just starting. David paused, his voice lowering. His next course of action was already in place. You are suspended, he said. I have no love and respect for what you did. David knew he had won. My team, and the people on this board, along with the police, will be on their way. The game was over. In 1 minute, let's act. A pregnant black woman was denied dignity. Brief summary of the injustice. Her husband fought back. But the fight isn't over. We need your voice. Visit link to a petition, contact your representatives, or donate to the cause, e.g. hospital reform, civil rights organization. Demand accountability and equity.